Hello, AP Worlders, and this is your lecture on the classical empires. As the early states and empires grew in number and size and population, they frequently competed for resources and came into conflict with one another. In quest for land, wealth, security, some empires expanded dramatically. In doing so, they built powerful military machines and administrative institutions that were capable of organizing human activities over long distances, and they created new groups of military and political elites to manage their affairs. As these empires expanded their boundaries, they also faced the need to develop policies and procedures to govern their relationships with ethnic and cultural diverse populations, sometimes to integrate them within an imperial society and sometimes to exclude them. In some cases, these empires became victims of their own success. By expanding their boundaries too far, they created political, cultural, and administrative difficulties that they could not manage. They also experienced environmental, social, and economic problems when they overexploited their lands and subjects and permitted excessive wealth to be concentrated in the hands of the privileged classes. Alright, so here's a look at the map of some of the places that we're going to study. Alright, we're going to study the Roman Empire, Persia, the Mauryan and Gupta dynasties, the dynasties here in East Asia, right, and China, like the Zhou, the Han, and then also over here, we are going to look at some of the America, or classical places of the Americas. These empires are going to have a couple of shared common problems. First, they have to decide, do you impose your culture on the people you conquer? Do you rule conquered people directly or through local leaders? And last, how do you get your wealth, taxes, tribute, and labor while keeping order? The first empire we're going to look at is the Persian Empire, which, as you can see, was located in what is current day part of Egypt, Syria, into Iraq, Iran, Turkey. All right, so it was located in that area, and it was the largest and most impressive of the time. They were descendants of the Indo-European people, and under their two most famous leaders were Darius and later Cyrus. And under those two, the Persian Empire would stretch all the way from current-day Egypt to current-day India. They had a very diverse population of about 35 to 50 million people, with dozens of different states, languages, and cultural traditions. The kings were absolute monarchs, but had an effective administrative system called satraps in each of the 23 provinces. So they broke this area up into 23 provinces, and then they had satraps in charge. All right, then they had lower level officials who were drawn from local authorities. So they had local leaders, and they had local religious practices were allowed in an attempt to gain support. The Persian bureaucracy, tax collectors, record keepers provided a model for the rest of the empires in the region, and later the Islamic dynasties. They had a standardized coinage, they had predictable taxes, and they built royal roads throughout here to facilitate trade and communication throughout the empire. All right, so although the empire's official Persian religion was the Zoroastrianism that you learned about in your previous lecture, they allowed the local people to follow their own religions to try to keep unity. All right, the next group are the Greek city-states. All right, now a lot of people got city-states wrong on their vocab quiz. All right, city-states are independent ruled individual cities, all right, that were states, but they shared like common cultural things, but they were independent cities. All right, and so Greece was a collection of small competing city-states who were also dependents of the Indo-European people. Greek civilizations, they had to be city-states because of the geography. All right, Greece's geography had steep mountains and valleys, so it was hard for them to unite. There were hundreds of city-states. Most of them were small, with 500 to 5,000 citizens. They were often in conflict, but they spoke the same language and worshiped the same gods. Every 4 years, they would have the Olympics. A distinct feature of the Greek civilizations is their idea of citizenship and participation in political life. Participation would vary in each city-state. For example, in Sparta, they had a council of elders to decide things, but in Athens, they had direct democracy where people directly voted for things. All right. So direct democracy is different than what we have in our country because we have representative democracy where we vote for representatives to make decisions. As you can see from the Greek city-states, location in comparison to what would be here was the Persian Empire. You can see as to why there would be conflict between the Greek city-states and the Persians. All right, eventually, though, a leader from Macedonia would come and take over the Greek city-states, and that was led by Philip II. And then later, his son, Alexander, who was also known as Alexander the Great, he would then conquer the whole Persian Empire. And it took him 10 years, and it was one of the greatest military feats of the ancient world. Now, the reason why we don't know much about the Persians is because when Alexander the Great got there, the Persian capital was completely destroyed. And so in destroying that city, we lost most of the info we have on Persia. After Alexander died, the empire was unable to stay united, and it got divided into 3 separate kingdoms. But the significance of Alexander the Great's conquest into taking over Persia, not only just because it was so impressive to defeat Persia, but more importantly, it disseminated Greek culture throughout the region. All right, and so that would be known as the Hellenistic era, when this Greek culture was spread throughout here. All right, and then the last one for part 1 will be the Roman Empire, which is going to be all around this Mediterranean region. All right, so if you ever get a question that says something in terms of the Mediterranean region during this classical era, remember that includes Rome, Greece, but also Persia. So you could use any of those 3 places for the question if it talks about the Mediterranean region. But Rome would flourish. Rome and China would both flourish between 200 BCE and 200 CE. Both were about 50 to 60 million people, and they would shape the lives of almost half of the world's population. However, they were only dimly aware of each other and had almost no direct contact. Rome started off as an impoverished city-state ruled by a king. The aristocracy overthrew the king and established a republic in which the wealthy men dominated. They were known as the patricians. The poor class was known as the plebeians. Over the next 500 years, they would build an empire. Roman Empire encompassed the entire Mediterranean basin and beyond. For Romans, growth of empire meant opportunity. Right? Soldiers were hoping to gain land, loot, or salaries. After conquest, some Roman soldiers would gain great estates, or they would get promotions, or they would get political office, or move to political office. The army was well trained, well fed, and well rewarded, and were often brutal in warfare. Some conquered people would be granted citizenship into the Roman Empire, or they would be treated as allies and be able to keep local leaders in control. Rome became a warrior society, and that translated to home life as well, with women having little rights. Rome would go through a civil war led by Julius Caesar, and the result was Rome would now have an empire or emperor as their ruler. The first emperor was Augustus. Augustus, in order to keep order, he kept the Senate Rome created a series of roads throughout its empire to enable trade. All right, so that's a theme that you're going to see during this time period is like Persia building roads, Rome building roads, right, to facilitate trade. They started to learn about the importance of trade. The era of peace and trade during this time period in Rome was known as the Pax Romana. All right, and that's it for our classical empires part 1. All right, part 2 we'll do China, India, Africa, and the Americas.